Well, hey, this is John Burke. After studying clinical deaths for the last 30 years, about 1,000 of them, like when people die physically, their heart stops beating, no brain waves, and yet modern medicine resuscitates them to talk about this incredible life to come. Some call heaven, paradise. And after studying 1,000 of these, I wrote the book Imagine Heaven, really to show how the commonalities of these experiences across the globe actually tie in with what God has revealed in the scriptures. And today I have with me Randy Kay. Randy is a CEO of Tenor Corp. Randy, thanks so much for being with us today.
My pleasure, John. Thanks for having me.
And you were actually in the medical field the day you died. Tell us a little bit about what was going on in your life and what happened.
And my entire career was in the medical field, primarily on the industry side, although I've been trained. I graduated from Northwestern University and then had been trained in cardiology and neurology. And then I led a clinical team for companies like Johnson and Johnson and the cardiovascular space. And then also I was the corporate operations director for a pharmaceutical company that was the fastest growing at the time. We were developing neurological pharmaceuticals, therapeutics, one of which was an Alzheimer's drug. And we were on the front cover of Time magazine and all the major networks because it was a breakthrough finding in the field of healthcare. So I've been in that space, either leading teams in the research of technologies and training surgeons and cardiologists on minimally invasive and robotic cardiovascular surgery. So that was my field prior to going into this.
I'm glad you pointed that out because one of the things I've been saying in this series of interviews is we're talking to people who really have zero motivation to make up wild stories about an after death experience, right? Surgeons, people like yourself, commercial airline pilots, professors, and yet you're all telling this amazing thing that happened the day you died. Why don't you bring us to that? What happened?
Yeah, well, I preface this by saying I was not a believer in near-death experiences. I was a skeptic. I thought they were imagined, chemically induced, or what have you. So I had flown back from a meeting and had an enlarged calf about twice its size. Reluctantly went into the doctor. I knew something was askew because I could not breathe at the latest point and going from the kitchen out to empty the trash. So I knew it wasn't just my asthma or something else. It was something that was more severe, and I knew there was potentially some clotting. So I went in to the doctor immediately. Was sent into the emergency room. I had developed by this time, because I had put it off. We had a vacation planned by the family, and by this time I had 6 blood clots, which had traveled from my calf all the way to the main airway, which is the pulmonary artery. That was blocked at this point, so it required ventilation because at that point I could not breathe independently. It was becoming worse and worse because the blood clot was enlarging. So at the same time, there was obviously an IV for an anticoagulant, that is to stop the blood clotting. And at that point, the doctor came in. He tried to draw blood. He couldn't draw blood from my arm. He said, "Well, this is strange." What had happened was it was a hospital-acquired infection that was now being around the IV site, now being infused throughout my entire body. So now that further caused clotting throughout my body, so that it was like a traffic jam, only the highways and byways were veins and arteries throughout my body. So that was the point at which I went into septic shock. And then I started convulsing, and I clinically died for a period, according to the medical records, for a period of about 30 minutes. And that's when I had my of course, my near-death experience.
And then the medical records actually show that you were dead for 30 minutes?
Yes, and part of that, the reason for the delay in the process was because I was transferred to a general floor for the IV solution until, because I had been in the critical care unit, and and the nurse had stepped away from the station, and then later realized that I had flatlined. So normally the intervention would be quicker. In my case, it was not. So it was a case of it was a case of the hospital not being fully engaged with me to the point where they could intervene initially before that I got to that point where I was clinically dead.
So tell us what happened at that point. What were you aware of, and were you yourself? What happened?
No, I wasn't myself. It was not business as usual, that's for sure. What had happened was that initially I was being pulled up and I could see my body for just a short period of time in the hospital bed, but I was in a vacuum being pulled into a light that was streaming from above. And there was a darkness initially, but the light was infusing that space, illuminating in my environment in an ethereal place that I couldn't explain at the time. I really didn't know what was going on, except I knew I had peak senses. I could breathe. I could where I could not before. I could see things that were more. Let's say I was aware of my environment more than I had been at any time previously. So I was rising up. I was seeing things out in the distance, in a faint distance, and then at some point, I settled on a ground. And at this point, the light had illuminated everything around me. And uh,
Let me ask you a question. As you were rising up, were some talk about similar things like heightened senses, like not just our five senses, more like 50 senses, or blended senses, and even, telescopic vision far off in the distance, and going through either a tunnel or a pathway, or what was it like that for you?
It was definitely like that for me. I don't even know what those senses are. The senses of sight, smell, hearing, those certainly were accentuated through the experience, but there were other senses as well. For example, I could sense that everything was alive. Everything was growing. It was as though when we live in this environment on Earth, we know that while we're existing, the plants outside are the metabolic process is continuing, and all of the things within our world that we're unaware of in the micro. We are aware of the macro, what we see, but we don't know what's going on. With my sense was an awareness that all of this was going on, that everything was alive, that everything was growing, and that nothing was static, or that nothing was really dead. Everything had come alive, including yours truly.
Huh. That's interesting. I've heard others say very similar things. So you said you landed in this place. What was the place like?
Well, initially, I was in the place next to a figure, and that figure. Excuse me if I get emotional at this point, because what I noticed after is that my recollection, generally speaking, is more vivid than a dream would be, or something that would be imagined from an experience. I'm there. I'm there when I start to talk about it.
Well, and that's actually a commonality I found with having interviewed or studied 1,000 of these. That's what people say. It's like, it's not a memory like a memory in your brain that fades with time. It's like present. So understandable. So you're in this place, and what'd you see or what happened?
There was a figure that had wrapped his arm around me and had tugged me, and I could feel the soft, cottony, cushiony wardrobe or whatever he was wearing. And he was pulling me tightly to him. And uh, instantly, there I go. Um, Instantly, I knew it was Jesus Christ. I was overwhelmed by the love and being in the presence of the Lord. And I was consumed by that presence, so that I wasn't inclined to look around, because I just wanted to be in that place, in that person of Jesus Christ. And that was before he said anything. I just knew, because part of that sense of being in heaven was a sense of knowing, a sense of awareness that I had never experienced previously. But this time, instead of feeling an emotion or anything related to an action of love, such as saying, I love you, Jesus Christ emanated that love in such a profound way that I didn't want to be anyplace else but in his presence. I did not. Yeah.
How did you know it was Jesus?
I was aware it was Jesus. Initially, I knew it was the Lord, because I had this overwhelming sense of love. Now he did say, have no fear. Trust me, you're going to be okay. And you're not going to stay here. I'm going to return you. He did say that, but right off the get-go, initially, I knew that this was the Lord Jesus Christ. And when we finally did look at each other and I turned, his eyes just tunneled through me and exposed everything dark within me. I saw the illumination of the Lord, that light, I suppose, that was infusing all of the darkness, did that personally for me. As I saw into the eyes of love itself. I mean, yeah. I don't think there's any other way to explain it, except I saw into the eyes of love. And it might seem esoteric or too ethereal or whatever. I'm not a romantic. I'm a realist. I'm the doubting Thomas. I have always been, prove it kind of guy. And so for me, just trusting in the Lord had been hard previously, but there it was absolutely right and comfortable. I had no reservations that Jesus Christ had taken care of everything on this in my world. My family was young. They would not probably be able to live in the lifestyle that they previously had experienced. I had all of these concerns and worries being in the hospital in the bed, but there in the presence of the Lord, I knew that he had taken care of all of it. And so there was that part of the knowing of what Jesus Christ had done for me, that comforting feeling, that absolutely phenomenal feeling of being comforted. And then he told me something that I didn't want to hear. And
What was that?
That's the part that was disappointing.
What was that?
Well, he told me that I would be going back, that my purpose had yet to be fulfilled. We started walking together, and it was that point that I was looking around my environment, and I was seeing all of these amazing things and the colors that were of different shades. It was as though there was a veil that I had seen on earth, and now it had been lifted, and everything, the colors were more striking, the fragrances more pronounced, everything that I saw around me.
What were the surroundings? Where do you think you were?
I was in heaven, a paradise. I was in a place that was unlike Earth, in the sense that Earth was like a damped down version of what I saw. Uh, I saw I saw landscapes. It was, I think of it. I know you've talked, John, about it being kind of like another dimension, and it was. Clearly, it was another dimension. And I think of it also as looking at a beautiful landscape, here on Earth, and at an art gallery, let's say. And then all of a sudden, I was in that landscape, and everything was alive, and everything had come alive. So everything that I was, let's say, looking at from a peripheral vision sort of way, I was seeing in a pronounced way that was real, was the the waters that I saw streaming, the colors that I saw that were not only more vibrant, but also there was everything was growing. I just can't explain what that was like, except for everything was alive and flowing. I saw these figures in the distance, and just joyful and kind of dancing and walking about in these
Like people?
linens. So they were people, yes, they were people, and they were joyful, and it was a column. There were columns, and it was like a linen flowing through, and it was off into that distance, and I saw them, and I didn't know exactly what they were. I heard these wondrous voices, and that were like 100 choirs and singing the Lord's praises, and I just was in absolute awe. But again, most importantly, was my experience with Jesus Christ. And when he told me I would return to this earth, I felt like a kid on Christmas morning, who wakes up to open his presents, and then the parent says, "Well, you got to go back to bed." And
You got to wait till next Christmas.
right. And so
Oh
I
man.
challenged him. I said, "Jesus, I don't want to go back. Why?" And he said, "Because you have yet to fulfill your purpose."
So let
Uh,
me ask you, because I've heard this commonly, that when you're there, it feels like this is where I was meant to be. Like you realize all the things wrong with Earth. Suddenly, okay, this is why now I'm where I'm supposed to be. Is that what it was like?
it was home. It was home to me. And I still feel like an alien in this place. I still feel like I'm orphaned in this world.
Is it hard to be
That
back?
Excuse me?
Is it
Is it hard to
hard to
go
be
back or
back
be back?
on Earth?
Um, it is and it isn't. It is in the sense that I long for that comfort and being home, and having no cares, no worries, nothing that would be cause for concern or pain or suffering. The flip side of that is that I know now that my purpose here, this is like a workstation, and that God will determine the day and the time when I will return. But I know I have a purpose to do, as each of us does, and
Yeah.
that was made very clearly as we were walking. Because he said essentially to me that, because I said, "Okay, God, just tell me my purpose. Lord, tell me my purpose. If you're going to send me back, at least I should know why." And he said that he would reveal his purpose to me, moment by moment, that I was to stay dependent upon him. That is, I was to rely on God for the answers at the time and the place that it was appropriate. And again, that was hard for me. I've never been in that. I do, 2, 5, 10-year plans. I'm always thinking strategically in terms of what's the next step. How do I do it? How do I plan? And I think the Lord knew that I was that type of person, so that he needed me to remain dependent upon him. And there was something very interesting, John, that happened, that I've written about, and that is, as we were walking, there was a butterfly that landed on my shoulder, and it was a striking, more beautiful than beautiful, the butterfly. And like in any of the other things that were happening around heaven, I just thought, okay, well, this is cool. This is just another beautiful thing, another amazingly striking thing that was resting now on my shoulder. And Jesus said that butterfly was like wisdom, and the butterfly represented wisdom, and wisdom would guide me on this earth, where I would go and what I would do. But like the butterfly that was resting on my shoulder, if I were to move abruptly or quickly or away from God's leading, then that butterfly would fly away. So I knew the Lord was telling me that I needed to get still with him. I needed to draw close to him. And the essence of knowing my purpose was being steeped in his presence, just like I was in heaven. And that if I remained still and sought the Lord and remained steeped in his presence, that wisdom would be my guide, and that butterfly would not fly away. It was a very revelatory message or symbol using the butterfly for me personally, because then I knew that Jesus had revealed something in my spirit that I otherwise intellectually would not be able to reason out. I knew, even to this day, whenever I get frenzied and whenever strife happens or worries start to enter in, one of the first things I'll do is just get still, just rest in the Lord, start praying, start reading His Word, just pressing in to be with Him, because being with Him for me now, having experienced what I did in the presence of the Lord, is more important than anything else. I don't have the worries about, like in today's day and age, we just don't know what's going to happen. For me, I know that it's going to be okay. And the Lord impressed upon me more than once in heaven as we were talking that I was to trust Him and just trust Him. And I knew His love was sufficient for me and His grace was sufficient for me. And that was enough.
I've heard you talk about that, about what Jesus said about your purpose. And I think it's so encouraging to all of us, really, because we all struggle with that. Like, gosh, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I living my purpose? And I think so many of us get caught up with achieving greatness in the world, which, interestingly, you have done. I mean, you've lived in the $1 million houses. You've been on Time magazine covers. You've done all these things, and yet what Jesus told you is what we can all remember: is that we all have a purpose, and we live it out, staying connected to the God who created us for love. And, it's interesting because Jesus said that his last night on earth, in John chapter 14 and 15, first he says to his friends, I'm going away, but I've prepared a place for you. And he was talking about heaven. He said, and I will come and get you, and you will be with me where I am forever. And, he talked about, and we will eat and we will drink together, and it's life, right? And just like you're describing. But then in John 15, he says, abide or stay connected to me. Just like a branch stays connected to the tree and so it bears fruit, you stay connected to me and you will bear spiritual fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. And I always wondered, what do you mean we can do nothing? I mean, people do a lot apart from Jesus, right? But I think it's just what you're saying. It's like the very purpose He created us for, we can only do learning how to stay dependent, connected in a moment by moment, daily kind of way. And that's exactly the message He gave you, which I think is it's very hopeful for me, because, even though I've studied this and written on it, and, I've studied the Bible a lot, and, but I'm human. And I think, like we all are, we struggle. We're like, am I doing the right thing? It's not going the way I thought it was supposed to. And I've often come back to that, what you said, like, okay, I can live my purpose, but I got to stay connected.
Yeah. I was an agnostic, and I was an agnostic, what they call, I guess, intellectual or pseudo-intellectual agnostics. I did a research project in Northwestern University to disprove all religions,
Oh,
with a
really?
team of people. So, I was hardcore. I tried to get uh, Christian students or organizations off campus or wherever I could at the time. So I was an ardent agnostic. So it's not like I came from the perspective of always being a man of faith. I wasn't. Faith was hard for me.
Now,
Uh,
had you come to faith before this experience?
I had come to faith before this experience. This drew me closer to the Lord in the very way that I was prevented from being close to Him previously. In other words, I always had I had a faith in Christ. It's a story that I don't think we probably need to get into in terms of how I came to know Christ. But my faith in Christ was somewhat cursory. That is superficial. That is, I could not reason God away, the God of the Bible. Obviously, we found 1.26 million to one, where the statistical analyses that the God of the Bible was real. But that wasn't enough even for me to accept Jesus Christ. It took the Holy Spirit drawing me in. What I think Jesus did for me that I think is a message that I bring forth today is that those who are seeking to be quote unquote successful are really seeking after something that is like a vapor. You can attain it, but it disappears. Trying to be on the world stage, trying to be, have the nice house and all of the accoutrements that this world has to offer, just don't satisfy. Anyone who has attained it, I think, and really is genuine about the level of satisfaction they have from all of these things that the world has to offer, would have to give it an honest answer that those alone are not going to satisfy. I realized that the Lord is the only source of satisfaction. And to this day, He's really turned my life upside down. He really turned my life upside down after that. I struggled. I went through challenges, through periods of suffering. It was not easy after I returned. I had some degree of disability after I was restored. So it wasn't easy, but the Lord had used those trials really in that experience in heaven to teach me this one thing, and that is that always, always God will redeem that was lost for that which is gained to a greater level. The heavenly value that I learned that is rewarded in heaven, things like joy, things like comfort, things like a sense of being purposeful. In this earth, we talk about being intentional, but in heaven, everything is intentional. There's nothing that goes to waste. There's nothing that is done just happenstance. Everything has a reason, and everyone has a purpose in heaven. And I tried to bring this to this earth, and I questioned why God would allow me to go through this suffering after I thought, well, at least, God being a God of mercy, desiring to give good gifts to His children, at least might, make it an easier transition. And He did not. He did not. I went through a second pulmonary emboli. I went through my daughter suffering from drugs and mental illness, all of these things. And I had always hid the fact that I had been challenged with depression. I had hid that fact from everyone. And the Lord wanted me to reveal that to everyone. And I thought, why, Lord, are you doing this? Why are you breaking away these things that at least I had some semblance of success in the world? At least people could respect me for who I was. And I just remembered, I remembered being with Him. And the fact that nothing would satisfy except being in his presence. Nothing would satisfy except fulfilling the will of my Lord and my Savior. And he still teaches me that today. And I'm so thankful that he did that. He could take away everything. And that would be okay as long as he didn't take away himself, because that's all I want. It's just to please him, and to be with him. He's my best friend, Abraham.
Well, and I think you being willing to, having had the world success, then to be willing to come back. And I know you wrote a book, Dying to Be with Jesus, where you pretty much ripped it open and shared all your vulnerabilities, depression, your struggles, which I know must have been difficult, but you told me it's been encouraging in the sense that many people that you found were hopeless or suicidal or have written to you, and it's helped them realize, okay, just because I'm going through difficult times doesn't mean God's not with me or not doing something through this. It's going to count for eternity, for a life that's a real life that lasts.
And that book was inspired. I was interviewed on God TV for a book I'd written on thriving in life, finding your purpose, what have you. And it was blah, blah, blah. It was based on a lot of research, and it's good stuff. But when I was coming back, the person who interviewed me was the first one that interviewed me publicly and had known about this near death. Only a handful of people did. For 14 years, I didn't share it with anybody. I didn't want to share.
Why was that?
Excuse me?
Why?
Well, because he had known me. He had been a former pastor of mine.
No. I mean, why didn't you want to share it? I've heard that a lot, but it's hard for people to understand. Why wouldn't you share that?
No, and even to this day, because of the people, the challenge. I mean, since the book was released, Dying to Meet Jesus, I've gotten some people who have said some nasty things, like things that no one has ever told me to my face.
Like you're just making this up to make a buck.
Yeah, and
which is ironic, because I try to point out that, like, people like you or Dr. Mary Neal, a spine surgeon, a CEO, you don't need to. I mean, people think you make money writing books. You don't, but but at the same time, it's there was a different motivation there. But people can be mean,
Yeah, and it wasn't something that really bothered me so much, because I knew the Lord wanted me to do this. For 14 years, I didn't feel I had to. I didn't feel compelled to. I think the God TV program reached an audience of about 300 million people, I was told. And I thought, oh my goodness, the cat's out of the bag. And I was on the flight back, and I heard the Holy Spirit, the Lord, telling me first he wanted me to write about my failures. I had never written about my failures previously. You just don't do that when you write a book about success. And then he said, I want you to share about our special time together. And that one was really hard for me. And but once I did, it started flowing. And now, we bring that message to U.S. military. It's on bases now, where we're helping them to overcome PTSD, to deal with suffering and trials, finding their purpose, because a lot of people who come out of the service don't know what to do. And so, you see a lot of veterans suffering with alcoholism and drug addiction. And I learned, even recently, that the book had reached a #1 in the category of suicide. And I thought, oh my goodness, in this time of uncertainty and disease, people are thinking about that would have never thought about things like suicide and hopelessness.
Well, and just think about, the genius of God's ways. It's not through your success that people find hope. It's through your humanity, right? That even having success, you too have been through the struggles, and yet, you've been face to face with Jesus and realized, which I've said a lot. I think when My conclusion is when we're face to face with him, we will realize, oh, this is what I've been searching for my whole life. This is why nothing else could fulfill on earth.
Absolutely.
And when you looked into his eyes, what did you see? I describe that.
Oh. I saw love. Um, it sounds so esoteric. Poets have tried to write it in words, and songwriters have tried to express it in music. And I never knew love like that. I never knew consummate love like that. I have had this kind of vague impression of God's love. And I was filled with love. I felt like an audience of one, where I was in the presence of the Lord, God Almighty. And I felt his full attention was on me. The cares of the world he carried.
Like you mattered?
And he said to me, fear not. And he told me to cast everything. He would take everything, all the cares, my family, all of the things. He wanted to take them. He desired to take them. Just give them to me. Just give everything to me. I'll take care of it. Just trust me. That's all you have to do. And I saw love in a way that was not an action or an emotion. I saw love as a person. Everything is conditional on this earth. Even as parents, we try to love our children unconditionally, but you that are parents know that sometimes our children don't quite deserve that and they do something. But the first time and only time that I felt absolute unconditional love. And that was what I saw. I saw love as a person. And that is so difficult to describe. We have glimpses here, I believe. I've had glimpses, but they're being face to face so clearly.
Nothing else like it, huh? Did you have a life review in his presence?
I did. I had a life review that was thematic in a way, because the first life review that I had was I saw my grandmother who had dementia, and it was ironic because I had worked on a drug with a company in developing a drug for dementia and Alzheimer's. And I prayed with her while she was in a skilled facility, and she was bitter. And I saw that bitterness, again, that playback of what happened. And I said, Grandma, you've got to ask God to forgive you. And then I prayed with her to receive Jesus Christ. I saw that playing back. And then I saw a life.
Did she pass away? Or
she passed away 2 months after that.
After your experience?
After my experience with her, yes. So she was in heaven at that time. And
did you see her? Did you see her in heaven, or did you see other people that you knew?
I saw my grandmother. My parents had not passed away by that time. My grandmother, yes. She was youthful looking. She was joyful. I thought it was ironic that my last experience with her before she departed from this earth was she was bitter. And and then I saw her joyful, and that warmed me. And then I
how old was she? People are curious about these kinds of things. Like, how old are you in heaven? And
she was young. I had never seen her like that. I knew it was her because she still had that appearance of my grandfather, but it was like somebody had morphed her into somebody who was, I don't know what age, 30, 40, something like that, but she was certainly more youthful than
Mm.
I had remembered her as my grandmother, certainly before she passed.
Wow.
And she was slender. She was a big lady. So
Oh
she was,
yeah.
she
So she
was,
was she was big on earth, but you said she was slender and
yeah. And that's, and that was, it's like me. I couldn't breathe. I've had asthma, difficulty breathing, and from the pulmonary emboli, but I could breathe in heaven. I mean, there's nothing, no one there
no
is
disabilities,
no
no.
disabilities, nothing of
Yeah.
that nature, nothing of that sort.
I think that
And
encourages people.
yeah, another life review was a boy that I had worked in the hospital for a while, and a boy was dying of cancer, and he told me he was going to heaven. Of course, I was clinically minded at the time, not spiritually minded. And he said, I'm going to heaven, and I thought, okay, well that's good. He said, and you're going there too. You're going there too someday, and I'd forgotten that. I'd forgotten he said that. Um, and
Oh,
here it
but
was.
you're seeing this in your life. Jesus is showing you your
Yeah,
life back. And
yeah.
what's time like? Are you seeing your whole life or parts of your life?
I'm seeing parts of my life. I'm seeing a streaming vignette, if you will, of parts of my life, and it all revolved around salvation and those who had been had impacted my own salvation, because I had been an agnostic, and those who helped me, like somebody, a Christian who lived across from me when I was an agnostic and didn't preach to me, didn't evangelize to me, just lived a life and just exuded the character of Jesus Christ, and that drew me in. And people that I had prayed for, like my father, who was a World War II hero, but never really was close to Jesus Christ, and praying with him. And those kinds of instances that revolved around my own salvation and my own ability to pray for others, and people I didn't even know. But the Lord was revealing these cases, these vignettes of people that I had prayed for, who had prayed for me, and they were all answered prayers in ways that I was in some ways unaware of.
Well, that's fascinating because, I was just today texting someone who is a friend, who has severe cerebral palsy, and we were texting about prayer, and she's struggling. We're in the middle of the coronavirus. She's shut in. And we were texting back and forth, and she was asking just, what good is prayer? It doesn't seem to do
Hmm.
anything. And so
No.
it sounds like Jesus was showing you something that we can't always see.
Well, another story that I think is ties into what you said, John, is, so here I was. I woke up in the hospital bed, right? I smelled the acrid smells of the disinfectant, and it was horrible. I went from, here I was in heaven to this place where I was in the hospital bed. There was a couple that was by my bed. They were singing a song, a worship song. And it was the same that I'd heard in heaven. And I thought, well, what is this about? Was I hearing them, the echoes of their prayers while I was in heaven, or when God was sending me back? I wasn't sure. And then as I was praying about it, the revelation came to me that they were praying for me at my bedside, and their prayers were echoing in the halls of heaven,
Hmm.
such that the Lord heard their prayers. And he said this to me. He said, there are people praying for you. They're praying for you now, and I'm going to send you back.
Hmm.
So the effect of prayer, I learned through that experience, and certainly through the life reviews as well. The prayer works. I'm telling you, prayer is like picking up the phone and talking with God, and God says yes. He may say yes in a different way than we expect. It may be a yes in a way that is totally anathema to what we want it to be. But he says yes. He says yes, and he said yes to their prayer. And I knew it in that profound way, in that experience with them having prayed for me at my bedside. So yes, God answers prayer always. I know
Hmm.
sometimes it's a no to what we want, But when we pray for him to draw closer to us, to draw somebody closer to him, those kinds of prayers that are steeped in really what is good for the purpose that he has provided for us, those kinds of prayers are always met with a yes. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, absolutely, prayer works because prayer is conversation with the Lord, and he
Mm.
answers it. I know that. There's no question about that in my mind.
Hey, one last question for you. We're in the middle of the coronavirus right now. People dealing with a lot of fear about death, about life, about jobs, about economies, all those kinds of things. What would be one thing from your experience that you would say to us in closing?
They, I suffered some of the more severe symptoms of COVID. I didn't have COVID-19. I had MRSA, but I couldn't breathe. I had a temperature of 105. I was on a ventilator. I had all of that stuff. And my greatest fear was not being able to breathe prior to this happening. I had asthma. So if the
Mm.
Lord if I were to say to God, okay, take me with a heart attack or, whatever, but don't take me out. Don't, put me in a situation where I can't breathe. That was me. So my greatest fear was not being able to breathe. And that was the very thing that happened to me, was that I was not able to breathe. So our greatest fear, I would say, and that is loss of a job, which been there, done that. Loss of income, been there, done that. Loss of life, been there, done that. Loss of the ability to breathe, and all of those other things. Not just that I've been there, done that, but I know on the other side of all of those things is God. On the other side of what we're going through is God's answer to that. That I know that he redeems that which was lost for that which is of greater gain. Because what I've gained in losing a lot of those things that I had previously, I would not trade for anything in the world. He's opened up opportunities and vistas to serve him in ways that I would have never otherwise served him. I would have been diving into the corporate world and diving into stuff that I'd done previously. So I use that as a seminal moment, and I would say to those who are fearful of the coronavirus and what might happen in the future ahead, is that God is on the other side of it. He already has repurposed your life to a purpose that is more profound and quite more spectacular in a way that will allow you to serve out your purpose for him. Because I know that once we're in heaven, and he's going to make the determination as well, by the way. So if you're fearful of death, we're on his clock. And the time of the day is going to be determined by God. I mean, he told me as much, on that day that he makes the decision. So regardless of what we do, and we should certainly be diligent or have due diligence in addressing the issues of the day, but he is the one in control. And with God on the throne, then that takes away the burden, of what's going to happen. Because I serve the Lord certainly more, I would say, more purposefully and more intentionally than I did before this happened. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. I wouldn't even trade suffocating to death, or having my heart stop, or any of the other stuff that had to go through after the fact. And when I went through cancer, and when I went through uh, all of the myriad of things that I was challenged with, because God is on the other side of it. He sits on the throne. He will return that which was lost, will redeem it for a heavenly purpose, maybe not a worldly purpose, but a heavenly purpose. And that certainly is more profound and more impactful and more lasting than anything that can be provided by this world.
Well, and that's why I so appreciate you guys, who I know you do get, called things and mocked and different things for coming forward with your story. And yet I think it does remind us in a more vivid, tangible way that there is something coming that makes sense of all the things we go through. So, Randy, let me just thank you again. Thanks so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you for having me. God bless you.